about today is the universal rendering, or SSR, Angular universal, pre-rendering, and serverless functions, which is the more Jamstacky approach to this, and using Netlify functions. But again, we just did, I'll show you the resources at the end of the day, but I also run a podcast called Remotely Interesting with really smart people on it. So I can just host it and be surrounded by brains, but you get a lot of information. We covered rendering. And again, these are very smart people. It was Phil Hawksworth, Cassidy Williams, Ben Hong, and we just went in circles about rendering because it's another one of those things like serverless where the terms and everything around the actual technology gets very confusing. But things that they talk about a lot with rendering are these buzzwords, time to first byte. And that's basically just saying like the time between the user interaction of like actually requesting something and then the first byte of data that comes through. And so this is like our big O notation for rendering. It's the way that we're able to analyze the times. But in case, I just wanted to make sure I touched on these in case we brought them up talking about each one. First paint is when the actual first pixel gets rendered. First contentful paint is when the content that the user requests, whether in that, click in a navigation, is actually rendered. And then there's the time to interactive, which is really important when we talk about universal rendering and the Jamstack approach. So this is basically when a user can interact with a page. So all the paint, you can see it and everything, but when can they actually do something and interact and trigger events on the page? Just as a side note, we'll put in the link, I'll try to find it, and about the actual the hour-long workshop where I cover these things in detail. Jeffrey just made a really good point. Describe the overall topic in a sentence or two. Basically, in this workshop, we're going to cover two of the not most traditional ways to render an Angular application, because the most traditional way is to do it to do the client-side rendering. So we're going to talk about basically this hybrid rendering, and we'll step through the process of doing that with setting it up for Angular Universal to do that for you and host it. And we'll talk about the Jamstack approach to rendering, which is basically focusing on pre-rendering and serverless functions, which you'll see a lot of these two things actually overlap. And we're going to have a demo project. That first one, we set it up with Angular Universal and Firebase, and then take the same demo project and set it up by deploying to Netlify and using Scully to pre-render, which is the Angular static site generator, and Netlify functions to hydrate it with dynamic information. So I hope at the end of this, you'll at least have a understanding of, not exactly a full understanding of rendering, because that's a dedication right there. But at least you'll be able to explain the different types of rendering to your colleagues or people using your applications. And then have resources to keep you going down these roads to know even more, and then eventually become a rendering expert. Okay. I can see everything, so please feel free to put more in the chat if you have any other questions. Okay, so that is the really high-level overview of just some of the phrases that we talk about when we talk about rendering. When we start to get into universal rendering, I cover more of the different rendering approaches because, as you'll see, they all kind of combining in this universal rendering. So server rendering, it's funny because when I first started working with rendering, I just thought SSR was server rendering because it's called server-side rendering. So silly me thought that those things were the same thing. Like some people may have thought that serverless meant there are less or no servers. But nonetheless, server rendering is more of the process where your server is creating that full HTML page for you in response to the user or the navigation requesting it. That's those are the two biggest points about this. The server is like not the client, but the server is rendering your page in HTML, and it's happening upon request of the navigation or the user. So this is generally server rendering produces a fast first paint, which we discussed, and a fast first contentful paint. So the first pixel and the first actual content that the user or what was being requested. I still have much more limited lung capacity, just so you don't think I'm like doing the treadmill while I'm presenting. It's just the way I breathe now. So this can be a little bit slower than just serving static assets, because you're requesting it from the server and the server has to do the work. But if you can take advantage of caching, that will reduce the rendering time a lot more, because you're not rendering every single thing on the server. You'll be able to utilize the cache. This is also, you're avoiding those round trips from the client for like data fetching and templating on the client, because it's all happening in the server. So then we have client-side rendering. This is the most common rendering, and it's where the client is handling everything, including the rendering, the data fetching, the templating, and the routing. And the biggest downside of client-side rendering is basically the amount of JavaScript that's required as an application grows. So when we talk about like single-page applications that are pretty basic, client-side rendering is pretty straightforward. But when it starts to get to be a bigger site or have more data, you're going to have to adapt with all that JavaScript by doing things like code splitting and lazy loading, which are always great performance things anyway. So now we have this universal rendering or hybrid rendering or SSR. There's a lot of names for it, but again, this is basically combining that server rendering we just talked about and the client-side rendering that we talked about. So you are using hydration, which I'll cover what hydration is, basically filling an object with data, so that the full page loads are handled on the server. So you're getting all of that rendering, the HTML on the server, and then the JS, which is you're actually getting I think it's actually a JSON object, but you're getting the JavaScript and the data used for rendering embedded into the doc, and then it's triggered. Then the client will actually trigger those JavaScript code to get that, render that, or grab that data. So it can be a little tricky because it is a dynamic process, and there can be a lot of like computational overheads, and a lot of times there are things where you'll get double data. But let me first cover what hydration is. So I'm just going to read this verbatim because it gets a little confusing. Once the HTML is rendered, and this will be done by the server, hydration will process inline JSON state stored client side for the data in the page and attach DOM event listeners. So first you have to wait for the HTML to come through, and then it uses that JSON state that is stored client side to do the JS. And one of the biggest things about this is that the user, it'll be a quick time to paint, But that time to interaction is slowed down because you have to wait for those event listeners to actually be interactive. So you may have seen this before. I know I've run into it a lot where the page will load and you're like, great, that was really fast. And you go to click and nothing happens. So you think you have something's broken and you'll try to refresh. But this is actually just that the JavaScript the event listeners aren't interactive yet. So you're clicking and tapping and nothing's happening. So that can be just as frustrating to a user as a slow page load. So this is basically what it looks like. So you have that top part, which is the head, and that's going to come through, and then you're going to have that static HTML version of the requested page, and that's coming through from the servers rendering it, but it's generally inert because the use of the JavaScript handlers. So you're not having that happen until that JS boots up in the bottom there, that bundle.js. And you'll see there's like technically a duplication of that UL list there inside of that data. So those are some things that can be the downfall of hybrid or universal or SSR rendering. And then this is a really great article I highly recommend checking out. It's at developers.google.com in the web updates section. And it's from Jason Miller, who created Preact, and Adi Osmani, who's doing a lot of the engineering management with the web relations team. You're very familiar because he's got really, really great content out there. But this does a lot of covering of basically what rendering is, what it's covered, what it doesn't cover, and what each different types are. So I highly recommend checking that out. I'm trying to think if AOT does it, because I'm pretty sure, so it's doing it not just in time. So but I think it is still done by the client. The AOT, the compiler runs once at build time. So technically, that would be, it's at build time. So that follows the guidelines of more like pre-rendering, because that's not doing client or server-side rendering, it's doing it at build time. So none. Because it's at build time, it's not client or server-side rendering. So jumping into Angular Universal then real quick, because I'm going to cover this quite quickly because we're going to actually do it. But I do want to talk about it a little bit because this is basically a technology that renders Angular on the server. Usually Angular, like when you're typically running Angular, you're doing client-side rendering and executing in the browser and rendering pages in the DOM. And it does this when the user requests the pages and the data. So it's all being done on the fly, client-side rendering. With Universal, you're basically generating static app pages with their pre-render functionality. And then you're doing that in the server. So the server is pre-rendering all of these things. It's happening in the server. So server-side rendering. No, server rendering. Sorry, I want to be very clear about that. And then all of the data in the JavaScript is bootstrapped on the client. And then you're doing that with the client, with client-side rendering. Oh, yes. Big reminder. If in the dropdown in the Zoom webinar chat, you'll see a blue 2 and it either says all panelists or all panelists and attendees, you'll want to make it to more often than not to all panelists and attendees so that everybody sees it. But yes, Jerome put the question in there, which is which category does ahead of time compilation, AOT compilation fit in? Cool. And my answer was none. It's like when you get asked an or question and say yes, I say no. Okay. So we'll look at this when we run. So we're basically, we're gonna start out with that demo application and add in this way, and then we'll talk about these things when we get to that part. But just real quick, the good and the bad, you're able to facilitate web crawlers through SEO because you have pre-rendered content from the server. So the web crawlers can actually see everything, unlike if you run an Angular application now, when you look at the source, you'll see that it's just a bunch of links to JavaScript files. And nothing really readable by these bots. And these are the ones that help you get traffic through search engine optimization and are able to grab as much information, which will bring you up in the search results in Google as well. It also improves performance on mobile and low-powered devices. And this is because, again, you're not making all of these data requests just to render it, and you can also take advantage of caching. But we'll also talk about there are ways that you can actually look in Chrome tools and toggle the speed at which you're looking at your application rendering, so you can test that out and you can see for yourself how it improves in performance. And it shows the first page quickly with a first contentful paint that we talked about earlier. And again, that's because you're immediately serving up the HTML rendered pages from the server. And this is a really great benefit is the fact that it's just Angular. So as you saw, we're going to be using ng-add functionality, which is Angular schematics. Some of the bumps. Some of the browser APIs and capabilities may be missing on the server. So you'll see with the skeleton, we won't have anything in place that won't work just yet because we'll be using links. We'll be using router links, but router links actually use that native anchor tag, that A tag. So that's familiar to the browser API. But in the documentation, Angular actually provides some injectable abstractions to help overcome not having these APIs at the ready. But you don't have things like mouse and keyboard events. So without those events, the server-side app can't rely on a user clicking a button to show a component. So those kind of interactions, unless you use those injectable abstractions, can be quite a challenge. And I hate to say this because I know that the Angular team is always working on documentation, but the lack of documentation right now for Angular Universal is a bit lacking, for lack of better words. And so I would like to see more of that. Hopefully they will do that soon. All right, so first we're going to do the Angular Universal setup. But in order to do that, I want to give you all this demo project that we can work on together. So I'll go through the steps that I have in this project so you can see us actually going through it. So this project lives here. And so I made this into a template just so it'd be easier for us to work on it together. So you just go into use this template. I had to make sure my charger's here. Under Angular Universal, there's a project setup. Let me know if I'm clicking too fast too, or scrolling too fast. So the first thing we're going to do is actually start with this demo application, and I have the link for it here. And then we can hit this use this template button. And then it will open up in your GitHub account to create a new repository. and we'll just name it live 2. Give it a description and hit create repo from this template. And so you'll see that it gives you your own repo, but then it also lets you know where you generated it from. So now you can either take it and use these instructions for cloning it. You can download the zip. I always just clone it locally. So I'll head over to my terminal and I'll say, let me bump this up a little more. Git clone and give the thing there. And I'm going to call it demo, which is actually that RTRW demo is the name in the package.json and the angular.json. So, oh, that's fine then. So just a reminder, if you want all of those changed, because then everything ends up in your distributables folder, your dist folder, as whatever name is in the Angular JSON. So if you want those changed, like whenever you clone a project, if you want to change those so that you always know where your project's living, but you can also always just look at your Angular.json and see, oh, why did I cat that? Sorry, let me finish what I'm doing. You can see that information in your Angular.json if you need to. So we have this here now. You'll want to make sure that your Git remote is where you want it to live. And so this one is, if you grab the repo by not using the template, by just cloning, you want to make sure that you add the remote correctly for when you're pushing up code. So if we were in here, we can go ahead and I think we can run npm install to make sure that everything is installed. While that's happening, I will show you real quick. We'll open it in our code editor as well. Okay, that was odd. That's okay. So if we look in the Angular JSON, you can see that the output path has the name of the project there as RTRW demo. So if ever you want to change that for your build commands, that's where you do it. I hope you can't hear my laptop. It's like flying right now. It's using up so much. Okay, so we have everything installed, and we'll go ahead and run ng-serve so we can take a look at what we have. I'm glad you thought it was yours. Yeah, poor computer. At least I'm not recording the Zoom session to the cloud because I feel like that's when it really is mad at me. So we can go to localhost 4200. I'm working on a big project at work, so I have a lot of different localhost things that I go to. And we can see that we have our demo site here. And this is basically a skeleton that we're going to use throughout the workshop because I wanted to have a base application here that had things that we would want in the future, like a list of products and services, a blog, and then links to different resources, as well as eventually have search functionality, user login, and then obviously back to the home page. But there's nothing here right now. Products is just, these are all just modules built out. But it adds as our jump off point to kind of guide us through what we're going to be doing. And this is actually using, if any of these paragraphs look weird, it's actually using the Harry Potter lorem ipsum. So don't judge any writing that's there. It's not mine. Yes, I have. That's what, I don't know if you saw, Simon, when I looked down, I was looking for my charger because I knew that I was at something that wasn't 100%. So why does it have to compile from JS 2015? I'm not sure. Where is, oh, here? Wondering, am I, yes, if I have these lazy chunk, I am on version 11. I'm just curious. Yeah. I do not know, honestly. I can check in with, I'm sure that's something that the Angular team could tell you. I know that with 9, we were doing the different kinds of split so that you could have, dependent on the browser, I don't know if this is answering your question at all, but you're able to use the newer things for browsers. There's actual technical terms for this, but it would give you the different kind of files needed by that browser so that you could just load, if you just wanted to load up the newest ECMAScript or JavaScript libraries, you could. But feel free to ping me later and I can direct your question to differential loading. Thank you. But I don't know if that's what you're asking or not, or if that's related to what you're asking. But we can share that question on different lines, or to lines that will give you a correct answer if you ping me after. Okay. So we have our project there. We have we know that we have an Angular application. We know that it's actually serving up just these scripts. We can't see anything else that lives there at the moment. So actually going through this, it's being client-side rendered, and we're not really getting the best SEO capabilities from it going this way. So let's go ahead and get started with the, I'm going to move this over so I can just walk you through, but I want to make sure that I'm following the steps that I wrote for you so it doesn't get confusing if you have to do it later. So now we're going to the next step in the process, which would be to actually set up Angular Universal. Again, there is a whole section kind of guiding you through this process in the documentation. But we're using the Angular schematics for adding Angular Universal to the application. And so if you're unfamiliar with Angular schematics, it's basically a process in Angular where you're able to manipulate an Angular project by creating a virtual file tree, making changes inside of the file system, and like changing, the package.json, and, being able to make different files inside of a project. And then in that virtual tree, it checks the virtual tree, makes sure you haven't completely blown up the project. And if everything works correctly, then you deliver the updated project to the user. So there's a lot of great things you can do with ng-schematics, including what Angular Universal does. So we're inside our project, we're in the root directory. We say ng add, I always say Angular Universal. I'm a developer, so I can't spell. And then, so we're doing the Angular Universal Express engine and geez, so if you're familiar with using Node, Node is Express does a lot of Node server tooling for you, and so this is basically making a server for you to do your server rendering on. Just realized I had this thing open. So we see here what has been created is the server files that we need. So the TypeScript file, this app.server.module, so you're making your server module, and then some configurations as well as a server.typescript file. And in this, I have this from the documentation, basically saying like the parts with the asterisks are what we're adding. So the bootstrapper for the server app is that main server .typescript one. I think now they just call it server. And then inside app, we have the server module, and in the root directory, that server TS is the actual Express web server. So the next thing we'll do is just see how this runs, like the part of the development process is, let me show you. Now we have a few scripts for SSR here in our package.json. So when we're going to run dev SSR right now, which is just basically saying, take this project and serve it SSR. We will not use it for production. So we go ahead and build this all out, and we can go back to our browser. I'm going to show you another thing on that doc page as well. I was too fast. So we still have everything. Like I said, the router links will still work because it's using that native anchor tag, the A tag. But if we had any other data that was coming through, we wouldn't be able to listen to those events because we're we have to wait for that full client app to work to have those event listeners. But then, I'm pulling this up. Oh, I did want to show you. So one of the things they talk about doing here is actually here. So what I was saying earlier, if you can simulate a slower network, that's in your in the Chrome DevTools, you can go to network and you can actually there's a throttling. I always lose this. So if you don't already know this command, it's the same for VS Code actually. Shift Command P. When you can't find anything and you have no memory like I do, under online dropdown, thank you. But so you can just search these, which is very nice. But like Doug just said, you just told me it's in the online, but there. So you can customize this and change it as you like. So that exists there if you want to mess with that and try that and see everything actually coming through. All my images are actually from Upsplash. So none of them are saved locally. Okay. Oh, sorry, I just saw Simon's comment. Thank you, Doug. And this is all just as a reminder in these workshop instructions. So now that we have that and we're able to actually see that that was built up on the server, we're technically rendering on the server. So already we technically have this doing the rendering on the server. And I want to jump into what one of the big parts of that is, which is step 3, a very short section of pre-rendering with Angular Universal. So with the release of V9 and Angular Universal, we actually have pre-rendering out of the box, thanks to Minko. So in this project, if you actually run npm run pre-render, it guesses what your pre-rendered routes should be. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me stop what I'm doing. I gave you the answers to all life questions on that screen share. So starting again, I swear when we come back from the next break, I'll have that screen sharing down. So since we have Angular Universal set up, we have the commands for actually building it as a a hybrid rendered application. One of the big steps of that is actually pre-rendering with Angular Universal. And with V9, Minko used guest parser. I should have linked this. I will. To basically guess your routes and pre-render them into static files. And the only thing we need to do now, as of V9, npm run pre-render inside the base directory of our application. So while this is pre-rendering, oh, here we go. So we can see, if we go to fade this out, change to our distributables folder, and then inside of the project folder, we now have browser and server. And inside of browser, we see we have these static files. And then, so these are the only routes that exist on the site right now: products, resources, and services. And if we say change into products, we now have this HTML page. And so, there we go. There's all of that page as a static HTML asset. So it basically went through, crawled through, saw what are the routes that exist. For each of those routes, I'm going to make a folder. In each of those folders, I'm going to create this HTML static page for that. So since it is using that guest parser, you should know that you can also have the option of actually making a list of routes. And Sam actually has a really great blog post. He actually does a lot of work with Angular Universal coverage and pre-rendering in general. This post is really great because he has this section that I quoted here to kind of lead you through that process of getting all of those routes. So if you have a bunch of different news items inside of your route news, you can grab all those, put them into this file, add that file to your package.json, and list routes, and then have that script call on that route so that it specifically knows how to render those dynamic routes. So again, this is a process that you take to make Angular Universal work well. And there's actually Angular pre-render, which is a module, there it is, that you can also use to just take advantage of that pre-render capabilities from Angular Universal. But that's a big step in the benefits of the hybrid form of rendering, because that is what gets your site up for the web crawlers, so it works well for SEO. So even just the point of even just getting to this point where we're able to pre-render our application is a great step towards that hybrid rendering benefit of being able to get your content to your user faster. So that's a pretty quick section, but very much worth pointing out how to take advantage of pre-render, and the fact that you can use it out of the box ever since V9 is very handy. So the next thing that we're going to cover is setting up hosting. And I'm hoping we get through all of this to get to the functions. If we get held up on this a little bit, I may get us right over to the function setup, because that is the one that can be a little less straightforward, I should say. But we will have a hard stop at the 30 mark, just to make sure that, because what we've covered here, I want to make sure we overlap with doing it with Scully, so that you can see the difference in those different setups. And all of the resources exist here, so that you can do it anytime after the workshop. Okay, I'm going to move this to the side to get us into the window. So there was a section in the setup to make sure that you had a Firebase account. But then I should have also noted that you will need a Google Cloud account too. And also, when I first set this up, I had to make sure that I had a credit card associated with the account. And I know that that's not everybody has that set up with their Firebase account. So you can always follow along if you don't have your billing set up with Firebase. Okay, let's go ahead and get back to the main directory, clear this out. And the first thing you want to do is install with npm install Firebase tools. You may already have this installed, and do it globally. Did I spell that right? Yes. I've been using Firebase for a long time. I really like Firebase because I like the CLI, but I just realized recently that one of the benefits of the Jamstack architecture is content delivery networks. This is basically a dumb server, a CDN, and it limits the amount of effort it takes to with the infrastructure of server setup. And there's a lot more to it. I'll talk about the Jamstack session. But I've definitely done both. I've spent most of my time doing the traditional server setup. So knowing that Firebase also has CDNs is very exciting, and that's how you get these quick, usually quick deploy setups all with Firebase, where you can just do Firebase deploy usually. Okay, and I did make a note that you may want to make sure that you are logged in, because I ran into a weird error where I was logged in, but then I had to log out and log back in. So if you run into any unauthorized errors first, that might be something to check out. So in order to get this set up, we're just going to run Firebase init. Firebase. And we're going to want to do functions and hosting. You use the arrow keys to get to each one and use the space bar or A to select them. And then you hit enter once you have all the ones that you want to use. We'll create a new project. And yeah, I'm glad that they put this warning here that you can't modify this later, because I've definitely had to delete projects and fix it. And then we're going to just call it the same thing. I'm going to move this up just so you can see it a bit better. I'll clear the screen next time, but I hope everybody has snacks. I might just be the only snacker, but. So the first thing it's going to do is set up your project with that project name. I'm going to use JavaScript today just because the other functions that we're going to be using today with Netlify functions, we're going to write in JavaScript. This is basically just changing your index.js to an index.ts and allowing you to use TypeScript, which, does a lot more. And then you can also do TypeScript checks in your build functions to do that. But today we're going to use JavaScript. You can obviously use TypeScript. Popcorn, good snack. We're going to say no to ESLint today. I am very much a big fan of linting and prettier and all that jazz, but you're going to get a ton of ESLint errors with your functions directory. Like, there's a lot of small ones. I mean, like small but important ones that should be changed, just not today. Like, triple equals or in comparison to double equals. But we will install the dependencies now. So again, all these things are definitely optional, how you want to set them up or not. We are going to keep public as a directory. We're actually going to change these things in the file. We do not want to do a rewrite single page application, so we'll say no. And I just said yes to this because I love Git workflows. You'll see this pop up. Yay. Or they may have you log into GitHub, where whatever your status may be. Yes, I love Git workflows. So this is going to be not the full, I wish they did an example of this, but it's just your username and then the, did I say live dash too? Let's find out. Your username and then the name of the repo. It gives you lots of options or lots of chances to keep trying it. Because I just did just the repo name and that didn't work. So then I did the whole URL and that didn't work. So yes. I don't know if it's more confusing or not that I shrunk that window. Now you see a diaper with avocado on it. Just to be clear, it's not a dirty diaper. He's just eating avocado. Okay. So set up workflow to run build script before every deploy. Again, completely optional. And this is npm run build SSR, right? Yes. Which actually, we changed that, but because when we do add our functions, we'll change that. But as just a SSR like this, we're going to put that for now, and then we'll change it in the next steps. And do we want to do automatic deploy? Sure. And main is the branch that we will be deploying. So lots of questions from the setup. Creating my project keeps failing. I created a Google Cloud account with card info. If you go to, I may not have this because I didn't have any. No, there's I wish you could trigger a error. It will say in that error messaging that you can look at the debug log, the Firebase debug log. And I think it might just even be like Firebase debug.log or something like that. You can cat or open that in your code editor to see what the errors you're getting back are. It's usually pretty straightforward of telling you that it's, unauthorized or anything. Oh, but I did have a funny error, and I put it in here. Here it is. So I wasn't expecting this one. When I opened up, it said I hadn't accepted the terms of service. So HTTP 403 caller does not have permission. You may just want, these are two different. Okay, so first, please correct me if I am pronouncing this wrong, but Jane may want to look at the logs to see what error they're getting. This one I didn't expect. This Firebase error was the terms of service one. I just had to go to the dashboard and say create project, and then a terms of service thing to check came up. But Georgios and Simon, Firebase error, HTTP error 403, caller does not have permission. You may want to just so I also had a auth permission error that I actually had to do Firebase log out and then Firebase log in. I don't know if it was something odd in the cache. I was able to solve that by just creating a project from the website first to accept the license. Yes. Yeah. So that's what I was, that's what this error, hold on. I don't often do external screens. So anyway, so this error, if you see this Firebase error, caller must accept terms of service. That's what Scott is talking about in the chat, that you'll need to accept that terms of service. But I think that the 403 may be a different one. If you try to Firebase log in, log out and log in, let me know if that helps at all. Is anybody else having any other problems? I thought this may be where we would get a little bit of a hiccup because it's when you introduce a lot of moving parts. Because we're signing into not only just the hosting provider of Firebase, but also the cloud function provider, for serverless function provider from Google Cloud. Not that Google in general is a lot of moving parts, except it is. For good and for bad, it's a lot of moving parts. Oh, that's a good question for at the end. Okay, these are great questions in the Q&A that we'll talk about at the end. Okay, how can I change the script? Should be run before every deploy. Oh, we'll look at that when we set up functions. How can I change? Or are you saying that you do change it so that you do want it to deploy? So first of all, that's not a big deal. Those things that are pretty optional, and it's okay if you didn't click the right one, but they can be changed on your Firebase dashboard. And I think it's oh, I should have just went to the console, sorry. I think it's in the deploy. I'll get back to you about that. Oh, Google Cloud Creator. I'll get back to you about that because we're going to touch on that in the function setup, and because it's not a detrimental to anything that we're building today. No problem. npm run build SSR. I was able to create the project from the Google Cloud created project through the Firebase console. Is this you did that because you because you had the 403 error. So I don't know if anybody tried that log out, log in, but once you do something like that, you can just rerun Firebase init. Oh, you did do that and it still didn't work. Okay. So if you are still having the problem that Georgios and Simon had with the Firebase error, HTTP error 403, you didn't have permission, it seems that Simon was able to create the project from the Google Cloud created one through the console. So you just did add project and created it through these steps? Okay, so if you go to, Simon put the link in here in the chat, console.firebase.google, it will go to your console. You'll be able to add a project there and walk through these steps here. And they walk you through really well. It's a very well documented process. So we'll go ahead and move on to the functions part because I think we should be able to. How do you see the site? So the site isn't deployed yet because we haven't run Firebase deploy. You can just go to your console. And I think you can see that information either just going to that console page or in, I think it has the, oh, I thought I had the link in there. If you go to Firebase console where we just, oh, stupid Zoom, get out of here. I can't move my Zoom out of the way. Sorry. Oh, good. Okay. So through the Firebase UI, it worked. And now, because there's more steps because we have to set up functions to do the server-side rendering. So if you did Firebase deploy now, we have to set up a whole process to actually get it deployed using functions because in order for the function to run so that we can make the server generate the HTML, we have to bring the working project over, which I think will make much more sense when we actually do it in code. So that is all in step 5 of setting up our functions. So there's not too many steps. I think we can do it in these last 5 minutes to get this set up. So for the first thing that we want to do is change that public directory because we want to be serving up that static site folder. Because right now, when we say to deploy, it's looking at public and we don't have anything in a directory. There's no such thing as directory, or there is. There's not the project that we want up. We're just seeing this Firebase setup. So it does exist. It's just not what we want. So the first thing that we're going to do is make sure I'm opened up in code. Move this to the side and I'll just, so you can look at the documentation, but I'm also going to step through all of these steps. So first, I'm going to bump this up a little. If it's too big or too small, let me know. Okay, I think there are no questions. Okay, and also know that Jerome is also looking at the chat, so you can also ping him if I'm not seeing something. So first we want to go to our, oh, dag nabbit, Tara. Root directory, then open the editor. And then look at our Firebase configuration. and let it know that this is not what we want. We actually want you to look into dist, and then our project name, where the project is going to be built out. And so we know that when we go inside of dist, I'm in dist. Sorry. Because we were looking at what was being pre-rendered. I just like double checked to see if I was sharing my screen. Okay, so in the root of our project, you'll see this is where the angular.json lives and where, did I init from the wrong place? And that's why my Firebase isn't there. Yes. Sorry to lead you astray, Aaron. Okay, so I'm going to go through that process super, super quick again. So I'm in my root. I'm not in my root directory now. Okay, now I'm in the root directory of the project, and I run Firebase init. Let's see how fast we can go through this. Functions hosting from a existing project, which is this one, and JavaScript. No. Sure, because that only took a second, right? Okay, let's see if this is actually so. So technically here we could have said dist. What is it? RTR demo browser. So this is where everything gets rendered out, right? So technically, this is the change that we were making on that step that we were at. And we're not going to render it. We'll say yes to this. Sure. And then sorry. Live 2. Yes. And this is the npm run build SSR. It makes me feel like it put some of the files in the right place. Okay. All right. Let me open that back up. Make sure I had that right. Dist rtw demo browser. And then if we go to Firebase, we now either needed to change that. And then we'll also, okay, just want to make sure that nobody needed anything while we're in there. Okay, and then the other thing that we're going to do is add some rewrites because we want to rewrite everything and put it into this SSR function. So inside of, hosting, those ignores are fine. We're going to say rewrites. And it's going to be an array and an object in there is we're going to say take source and everything in source. And we're going to rewrite it to this SSR function. So that's everything that has to go into that Firebase. That's everything that Firebase configuration needs to know. That just put that all up on one line, all the ignores on one line. That was the change that happened on save. Excuse me. And then, and again, if I'm moving too fast, this exists here. Because the next thing we're going to do is going to our change into, like, look inside of our functions directory, but in VS Code we can just say control tilde to open up the terminal, change into functions, and since we're going to be working with the file system, we'll actually do npm install fsextra. And this came up with one of my coworkers the other day. I'm so used to not using --save because it is --save saves it to your dependencies, but that is, I don't even remember what version it was, but that became default. So that will be saved into our dependencies. And now, so we're in functions. We added that to our dependencies, because in functions we have a package.json in there, and now we're going to make a function that is basically going to make a copy of our working project and move it into the function. So we'll say code and we'll call it copy Angular. Close this out. And in here, we're just going to use that file system that we just why don't you know that that's there already? Nonetheless, then we're going to pass a asynchronous function. Doesn't need anything passed into it. That's going to say there's a source, const source. It is the directory. It is what lives 2 steps up, or 1 step up in the dist directory. Sorry, what will it format as? Okay. Sorry, I was flipping between quotes, single and double quotes. And then we're going to have the copy, which is going to be this directory's dist, the functions directory dist. So await file system removing copy and await file system copy from source to copy. Okay. And oh, I'm missing my first. Okay, I was like, I know a paren goes here, and that's gonna call itself. Okay, so we're basically copying those things there. And with that, we're actually going to change our build script in functions. So we'll say package.json in functions, in the functions directory. There's no build script here, so we're going to make this build script that calls on that file. I have very bad heartburn right now, so I'm sorry if I'm making lots of guttural noises. So we're saying So we're saying when we tell functions to build, look at this function that basically takes that existing distributor dist folder and copies it into the functions environment, because the functions needs to have that application in the functions working environment. So that's why it seems kind of odd that we're like doing all this like copying of things when you would think you would be able to point to it, but that's not the way that functions are loaded. So, excuse me, the next thing that we want to do is actually then build that out. And it's basically kind of another copy. But we do that in the functions index.js. So again, this is in the functions directory. And as another kind of tidbit, if you did writing your functions in TypeScript, it'll be index.ts. Pretty straightforward. What's nice too is when you do that init setup, it gives you these comments in here to help you set up your first function. Because I think that's a lot of people don't realize about serverless functions is that they are just JavaScript functions or TypeScript functions. So they're basically like code that you're very used to using and can be pretty straightforward, like how here they're just doing, is that function source index? It's, no, just functions /index. But yeah, so it's very straightforward. Like you could like get down here, they're just doing logs. It's just sometimes the setup of doing serverless functions, as we're seeing now, can be a little bit daunting. But I mean, even when doing that Firebase setup with the setting up the functions, it was just kind of a walkthrough of picking those settings. All right, so I got rid of those comments. We didn't need them. We want to pull in functions from Firebase functions, and then we're also going to pull in our universal application that we're making. We'll call it universal, and then we'll say require. And we're going to, I always want to make sure I get this right. So that's a backtick so that we can use the literal. So we're saying process, maybe. CWD, and where'd my curly go? Okay, process CWD. I don't want to mess up this part. So we're basically saying, where am I right now? Look in dist. You should find this is my project name. Remember to put your project name there, which if you didn't change it from the demo, it will be that render the right way RTRW demo server main. So that's where that application exists, and we look in main and we look for that app function. And then we want to export this. Oof. I'm going to put all the code in and then I'm going to switch to the other topic. But I put a link to another article that had a few more comments and stuff about actually running this process as well. So we're almost done though. Functions.https.onRequest. So we're saying that this is the function command of onRequest. I want you to feed it universal. And now that's everything you technically need to set up the functions in your project. So now we can make build commands in your root directory, package.json. So this one that's in source package.json, not your functions. You have some build scripts here already. So as long as you look at your package.json and see that there are SSR scripts in there, that's how you know you're in the right one. Okay, so under here, we're going to say build functions, and that's just going to say npm run prefix functions build. And then also build all. So do all the things basically. npm, so this is where we're saying npm run build ssr and ssd. That would not work. So do this build ssr, but I also want you to npm run build function. Make it functions. Functions. I mean, this also. That's why. Okay. So once you have that, you should be able to be in your root directory, npm run build all. So again, this is basically doing all these steps of saying, okay, I have to run npm run build the SSR way. And so there you go, you have that build. And now it's going to say, okay, now I know I need to go in and build out the functions. And doing that build functions is doing the npm going to functions and then run build, which is in the package.json functions, running that file that we just made. So technically we should have all of that built in. We should be able to do Firebase deploy. But now I'm a little worried because it gave me that billing error. Okay, that should work for you. I swear I set up my billing right before I did this because I had gotten this error before. You got a billing error too. And you also have billing set up? Okay. Oh, no. Yes, I can show you where to set up. I hope I don't give you my credit card number. But I mean, I'll show you how I set up billing. But as you see, I got that error. But that should work as long as your billing is correct. It may be because I set it up right before this that maybe they had to. Yeah, unfortunately, because it's functions, I think, because I feel like I've never had to set up billing before with just running a regular project. Yeah, so because of functions. So it's through managing your Google account that you set up payments and subscriptions. I don't want to click on that. I mean, like, I like you all. I just don't know how much I can trust you. And I don't know how much of my information is showing up on that screen. But you can set it up through your Google account. And then that should cover Google Cloud and Firebase billing options from what I recall. Wait. I still even have it open. Okay, so in this Firebase, there it is. I swear I filled that out, but that's why. Okay, so we're not going to go into this because I'm sure many other people have tutorials of how to set up what you need to pay for and how much you need to pay for and how to pay. But if you go back to your dashboard, go to your at the bottom, this bottom left, it has your billing stuff and what? Yeah, there you go. I wonder what kind of rendering they used for that. Anywho, you can actually select and pay there. See, I do have a thing. Anyway, well, maybe not. Anyway, let's move on. But so from there, let's just recap. We have our project set up with Angular Universal. So technically, we have the way to build it out so that it is server-side rendered. And it is also pre-rendered in doing that build SSR. It's pre-rendered and then has that information, knows how to have that information sent to the server so that when it's requested from navigation or user, your site HTML is being rendered on a server. We are able to set that server up using Firebase and enacting Google Cloud Functions to give that function to the server using serverless functions, Google Cloud Functions, don't you have to switch to Blaze instead of Spark? Yes. Yes, that's what I didn't click that final button because I knew when I did it the first time, it pulled up my account information. So I wasn't sure. But yes, look in the chat if you're also getting that billing. I swear I'm not a deadbeat. I just didn't click the button. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. We are a little behind schedule, but I do the Jamstack stuff all the time. We're going to get pretty far in it. Either way, I'll give you a bunch of resources at the end. So for the next 7 minutes, I want to give you a super fast review. Sorry, we lost childcare this week because we had a exposure of our childcare to COVID, and so we have Grandpa filling in. I'm getting lots of questions. Very grateful for the super last minute childcare, but just so you know, if you hear shouts of glee anytime soon. Okay, so the next step that we're going to cover, and I've opened 80 million windows now, of course, is just basically talking about the Jamstack architecture. So I'm going to do a little refresher. I just have to switch my screen sharing. I will remember to share the right screen now. I swear. So play this to a window. I almost hit leave. That would have been horrible. Okay, so you are now seeing the pre-render and serverless function slides that we are going to quickly go through because this one in particular, you will get a lot of information more in actually setting it up and doing it. Okay, so pre-render and serverless function is basically one of the core tenets of the Jamstack architecture. And we talked about pre-rendering before because we were using it inside of that Angular Universal. And like I said, you're going to see that a lot of these things overlap a lot because this is what everybody's kind of realized. Everybody that has made these approaches has realized it's a really smart approach to serving up your sites. So in the Jamstack architecture, pre-rendering your content, which is saying you're building it at build time. So just like ahead of time compilation we said was happening at build time, this is where this pre-rendering is happening at build time. So we're not, so whereas the universal rendering, we were doing it on the server, this is pre-rendering like we saw with Angular Universal, where we could do it in the command line and then have that file, that directory that had just the static assets. That's like what this kind of pre-rendering is. So it's the same. You can do it with Angular Universal and you can do it with Scully. And so that's the Angular pre-render we talked about. Scully is the only static site generator for Angular at the time, or right now, and probably for a little while. So a lot of people in the Angular community wanted a static site generator, but nobody had time to build it. So thankfully, the Hero devs team went and took the baton of the idea of needing a static site generator that would make it so you would be able to kind of work on that tool chain, have that build time, pre-rendering, and also, I mean, they do markdown rendering, and all kinds of great stuff that's a little more on that, a little more on that Jamstack approach. Sorry about that. There we go. So again, a static site generator it's basically, it's generating all the page of a site at once only when there are changes to the site. So it happens at build time. So you'll see with that Git workflow, anytime there's a new deploy, so something has changed, it'll rebuild. And so it's basically making it very hard to hack and really easy to cache. And when the combination, so that gives it to your user faster and more securely. Every major framework and language has one. There's Gatsby and Next for React, although Next is like more the framework, but nonetheless. Then you have Next. There are a ton more. We have Scully. So the great things about it, you're basically, or what is the architecture in general? The overarching architecture is really boiled down well with these 4 aspects. You're generating cacheable static assets like we saw with that pre-render. Deploying to a CDN. I touched on this a little bit in the beginning. This is a content delivery network. So you're getting rid of the complications of setting up the traditional server infrastructure. And also CDNs are smart in the way that they just have redirect knowledge. So you're able to have like the Netlify edge. We have it where you can have, it's globally distributed, like every CDN is globally distributed, but we also have multiple cloud infrastructure providers. So who knows with these times? I've only seen once a whole infrastructure provider go down, but I've been working with servers for a long time. But if that happens, you can fall back to other infrastructure providers, which is nice. But with the CDNs, you basically have these edge nodes, and it's listening for a user to request it as close as possible. So it has like its main origin node, and the static assets are sent to the node that's closest to the user requesting it. So it's there's no solution for latency, but this tries to make latency less. Not server less, latency less. Don't quote me. And don't add me on that either. But you're also getting that redundancy because it has a redirect knowledge. The redirect knowledge is actually extremely powerful, we're realizing now. We might talk about this a bit later, but there are things like edge handlers. So it takes that redirect knowledge and says, what is in the header information? Is there something that's telling me to run a JavaScript function? If so, I'm not even going to talk to the origin server. I'm just going to take that redirect knowledge that is handing me a JavaScript function and run that JavaScript function. So you're able to take header information like geolocation, time, anything else that you may have in header information and pass it to a JavaScript function. So it's a dumb smart. It's a dumb server that's very powerful. And then in general, when we talk about the dynamic functionality of the Jamstack, we're talking about utilizing client-side JavaScript to talk to the third-party APIs and serverless functions. So again, this is kind of like what we saw with that hybrid, except we're not using servers. But we're able to take advantage and kind of delegate that data collection to serverless functions and third-party APIs. And this is all wrapped around something that's very important to me, which is creating a better development experience through automated workflow and automated workflow and easier access and more accessible access by making things like headless CMSs, which we'll touch on. So I talked enough about content delivery networks. I'll link to the workshop where we delve into this more, and also my slides. Serverless functions, we also touched on a bit, where we're basically saying it's a single purpose function that the developer makes, but then it's hosted and maintained and executed by a cloud company, computing company. Like Azure functions, Google Cloud Functions, we just use AWS Lambda. And then this article is really great by Jason Linksdorf about talking about what serverless functions are. And then I'll share these slides. I have a whole section on just these different providers of different kinds of resources that you can use with serverless. But we're not going to touch on these today. We're just going to jump into the code. So I'm 2 minutes over where I wanted to be. So let's go ahead and still take a 5-minute break, and we'll meet at let's meet at 5 past. We'll take a little bit of a longer break. Actually, let me see if I can go ahead and give you 3 minutes of information. And then we'll meet at 5 past. If that's annoying, let me know. I'll stop. No one said anything yet, so. Okay, so I'm just going to give you 3 more minutes of information, and then we'll meet at 5 past. So we're going to, when we jump in and get this project live, we're going to use Netlify functions because it's basically AWS Lambda functions wrapped up in an easier way to use it. But we also have, so like we'll see here, we're just basically passing information in a function with a handler. So we're not even going to touch that today. We're actually going to use tools that come with about 2 lines of code. We'll do it for Auth today, that utilize the Netlify function, but we never have to set anything up. But this is all the code that we'll actually be going through today. And then, so we'll touch on this when we get back and do the wrap up. And yeah, we'll have a 7-minute break. So we'll meet at 5 past. And just a reminder that I will be trying to put the resources for all the code that we're going to cover today back into our workshop documentation, which is here. And I will put the resources for everything that we're about to do in the next section in there as well. So I'll see you at 5 past the hour. So we are pretty much at the section where we're going to start working on that Jamstack approach that I just talked about. Let me pull up chat so we have that here. Okay. Eating avocados, that's really good. Okay, so what we're actually going to do is take that demo project from the clean spot, which I think actually, yes, I did that first one first for us, and put the wrong link in. So this is what I thought I avoided last time, was showing you the wrong link. Nonetheless, we know that it lives, excuse me, here. And we can make a new version and call it under the right way. Jamstack, is that our, no? Good, okay. Jamstacking it. And so we'll make that new repo. My computer will proceed to take flight. And then we'll go ahead and clone that locally. So now I went back to a clean directory, my workshop directory. So you want to make sure that you're out of your other version of that demo and into a clean directory, and then run git clone. Then we can change into there and run npm install just to be safe. Well, that makes sense. I would need to install it. So we have that build installed. We're going to run ng-serve just for making sure we have what we have. you know what? We don't really need to do that. We're running out of time anyway. So what we're going to do, though, is make a configuration file for Netlify. Actually, let's go ahead and, yes, same one. Sorry, thanks for putting the link in there, Simon. Oh, I should code. We're going to make a netlify.toml. Please don't ask me why it's toml. We're going to do a netlify.toml, which is our configuration file. And that is basically just going to be the file that says, like we did for Firebase, where we said what our build command is and where we're building from. So pull it up, make sure I have the syntax exactly right. You won't always see the sources I'm typing from, but I'm typing everything I have in there. I just want to make sure I don't confuse you more by typing something wrong. So first we're saying, okay, when you build, here's the command that I want you to use. And so initially for Angular, it's ng build, and we'll say prod for production. And then it's going to immediately live in the dist folder under, let me make sure I have this right, just because I've given so many different names to things. Oh, I hate when code does this. I asked it to open in this directory, right? And it's not opening that. It's opening, let's see. It opened it in that live too. So this file is in the right place, but we have to go in here. Let me get rid of this one so as not to confuse us. So now we know we're in the right way because it's here. If anybody knows a way around code doing that, I'd be very appreciative. Okay, so in the Netlify configuration file, we're going to look at our angular.json to make sure that the output path is rtrw demo, because that's what we cloned from, so that's the information that it has. So rtrw demo is where the built project will live, and that's what we want to publish. Because it's an Angular site and it has that dynamic routing, we also need to set up a redirect that just says, from any route, I want you to go and look at index.html, because that's where the information lives. And it's going to be a status 200. We could force, but this is the bare minimum of what we need, just because the way that the routing works, and we're not doing, we're on the CDN, so we're not doing that dynamic routing. But that won't matter once we have it pre-rendered. But initially, that's just how we're going to set it up. So now that we have that, I just want to make sure I'm in the right project. We have to npm I Netlify CLI. Let me just make sure. No questions. Netlify, or npm install Netlify CLI globally. I'm going to hit enter, but I already have this in here, so it'll probably yell at me. Or not yell at me, but not take as long. And here's some documentation on the CLI in general, but the commands we use today are the commands that will probably only really need, you basically will do the setup and then not really touch the CLI that much again, except to say, open up my site like we would do with, because how we did with Firebase, where we said deploy it whenever there's a change, that's what we do with this one as well. I'm going to stop this because I already have it. And we're short on time. Okay, so then I'm in my project, I'm in the root directory. If I say Netlify init, just like we did with Firebase, we're going to create and configure a new site. I forgot that my coworker, Blitz Jackson, aka Jason Linkstor, had me one of his projects. It's ridiculous if that shows up. Okay, the site name. Let's just keep it simple. And there we have a site, but now it needs to know how to build it. So nothing will be there right now. So it already knows from that configuration that we want ng build -- prod, and that I'm just going to rewrite this because that always, just in case. Demo. So now it's up there, it exists. We can go to, you can use shortcut NTL. We can say NTL open and look at the dashboard. And we see that it is deploying now. And so that trigger to deploy, it's actually running that whole build process. So while that's building, oh, that's interesting. I was searching my email and it must have searched Chrome as well. While that's building, let's go ahead and add Scully so we can hurry up, pre-render, and get more stuff done. But if anybody wants me to slow down or cover anything else, please let me know. Again, I will give you thorough resources of blog posts that cover all these steps. Okay, so we have that configuration file that has that information. Now we can go and actually clear this out. We'll actually want to build locally. We could do prod to go faster, or do build to go faster, not do prod. Yeah, that's fine. I'm building now because when we add Scully, it's always going to want us to build. So I just want to get a jump off on that first. That was fast. So ng add Scully IO init. Gotta get that add in there. Woo. Yes, sorry, I can slow down. The contents of the TOML file online. Let me just paste them, if that works. Does that work okay? Okay, okay. And then the command that we're running, oh yeah, I should have waited for this install. I'm sorry, that's my bad. Because that would have given, then we would have been all on the same track. So in the TOML file is right in the root directory. So along with your other JSON file, configuration files, and the whatchamacallit, the package.jsons. Does it? I'm sorry. So just as a Netlify, just to have this here. That's the install command. And then this way you can copy and paste it. And then once that's all installed from the root directory, we're going to say ng add. I'm putting this in the chat. You can't see it because I'm putting it in the chat. Scully IO. Right? Yes. And you don't have to build now. We're going to do it again later. I just always like to do it because if I forget. Okay, so those are the steps we took so far. we at the root directory, we made the netlify.toml, which looks like this. And let's go ahead and toml. None of my, oh, geez, look at that rating. Probably shouldn't have called them out. I'm missing the build command we're setting up. That's this one right here. So in the netlify.toml, which is in your root directory, you'll say build, and then the command is here. And when we did NTL open, this command, Netlify open, it opens up the browser, the UI, and there's a deploy settings where you can also edit your build command. But it'll always listen to your netlify.toml first. And no problem. And just a heads up, it's live now. In the root directory, we made that toml file, which is the net. That's what I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Which is the netlify.toml. And then we installed the Netlify CLI. And now we are going to do, still in the root directory, ng-add at Scully.io and knit. So Scully just at the beginning of this year, around February, released which was like really great for the initial ng-conf. Would have been awesome to have more Scully fun in person. But now we get to do it now, today. But and then they just a few, September, October, August, they did the V1 release. So they're no longer in beta, which is very exciting. But as Jerome and Aristatus? Let me know if I'm pronouncing it wrong, if you prefer the name. As they pointed out, there's this error here that is a known, here's nice, error to the Scully team, Frosty, and the rest of the Hero Devs team with the Angular 11 release, but it should still work. So we have this set up. You can find more information at scully.io.com for the documentation and whatnot. So now that we have, oh good, Jerome tested it earlier with Netlify. So now that we have that set up, we can run ng-build. We'll say ng-build prod. And the reason that you have to run ng-build every time is because Scully goes through and looks at all of the built out routes. And it actually goes even into nested ones. So if you had, a bunch of, nested modules or nested pages where it was like, this is products, and inside products is red stool, and inside red stool is 3 legs, et cetera, et cetera. It knows that it needs to make and pre-render a route for each one of those. But your project has to be built out first. Oh, nice. I love that. Yes. And also, it's good to mention that Scully is open source. So as Eris pointed out in the chat, there is the issue that we're all following along with, or can follow along with. Okay, so we have that built out, and then we just need to run npm run Scully. It's nice they give you a lot of output inside. Yes. Inside here. So you see you're using the guest parser as well. Both, I just lost that. It did show. But anyway, so this is also using the guest parser, just like what we saw with Angular pre-render. So we see here that the route list, where the route list was created, this is always nice to check for when there's actually a routes finder that will pull stuff in for you as well. And you can edit and configure a lot of things inside of your Scully configuration file. But then it tells us what routes were actually rendered. So we know that these are, again, like we saw with Angular Universal, products, resources, and services. And then the home route, which is that blank route, was rendered to index.html. And it tells you how long it took. And then there is a flag for finding new routes when we add more routes. But this is basically as far as we're going to go in with Scully today, so that we could jump into some more of that dynamic function work. But the last thing that we need to do now, though, is actually update that our Netlify configuration file. Because now when we serve inside of the 7988. Cool. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have jumped to Angular 11 right before the workshop. So apologies for any Angular 11 errors that we're having show up. Works on my machine. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. But really, though, to say you can follow along and check out over here if you have any questions, and it'll be recorded. And no, I'm on Mac. Oh, you're just asking everybody else. Sorry. And hopefully, it seems as Jerome is saying that the team is aware of it, so hopefully these errors will be fixed soon. But this is honestly, we're just pre-rendering a Scully today, where we can move on to Netlify functions. And with that in mind, I want to show you that what we're going to change on our configuration file now that we want to serve up the pre-rendered version. So now the command is the same. We're just tacking on that npm run Scully, which then also changes where our project lives. So, oops. Sorry, I've always been used to doing Command B to open up that side tab, but it seems 0 navigates you around. Anyway, so you see here I said dist static, because if we look here, now that we had run npm run Scully, we look inside of dist, we now have the actual Angular project at rtrw demo, and then everything that Scully put out in this static directory. So just like we saw with Angular Universal pre-render, we see that there is a products directory, and inside there will just be the index.html file for that products route. Inside assets is where your Scully routes.json file lives. Let me cap that out real quick. So you see, it's pretty straightforward. But again, there is a Scully config file. And you can add, sorry to not open it in code. You can add routes that you specifically wanted to use in there. And there's also a way to exclude them. Windows, that's good. Okay. So now that we have that, we don't have too much time, and I want to make sure we get into questions and Q&A and resources. So I'm just going to show you the auth that we can set up. And again, this is a wrapper for a Netlify function. So it's not much code, but I just wanted to show kind of like we went from a very, so we saw the setup for doing the cloud functions. And so keep in mind that that again is a serverless function. So it's the same-esque approach of utilizing serverless functions to populate, hydrate data inside of a pre-rendered application. But with using this one, we're not using servers at all. And I know that can bring up a lot of questions. So let's just go through the code first. I'm totally gonna watch my code or like, sorry, so that I don't waste any time going like, did I get that letter right? Okay, so code, are you in the right place? Get out of here, Zoom. Yes, we're in the right place. We're going to open up, do I have navigation? Inside of our navigation component. Also, please, you have this code that I have written. Please do not judge my CSS skills. CSS is magic that I do not know well. I spent most of my life in servers. So login, we're actually going to change this LI to a div. I think I can do that just fine, and it won't be mad at me. Let's find out. And this is class login. And then we just say data, Netlify, identity button. So this is an open source project that I work in. It's an identity widget. Auth0, I think, has something like this as well, but it's basically a big thing in Jamstack. I'm in, source app nav.component.html. Yes, it's not just you, Steve. CSS is hard. A big proponent of the Jamstack architecture is trying to take advantage of what dev hours and dev resources we have, and therefore delegating anything that you possibly can. And a big thing that I think I've had most of my long struggles with is Auth. So when you have resources like Netlify Identity and Auth0 that you can delegate something that's so complicated and scary too, that's where I think it's really important to do that where you can. I'm going to spend a little more time. I may sound redundant, but it's because we're not changing too much code. So this is the HTML template for the nav component. Let me show you the app for this little person right here. Which, can I still put the little person in there now that I think about it? Let's find out. Class. I can't remember if it's like person or what. Oh shoot. Person. It's nice that you can just pull material icons in and a link, which I'll actually show you because we're going to head there anyway. If you haven't worked with the icons before, you don't have to completely install Angular material. You can just use the icons. I'm a big fan of that. Okay. So this is what I've added in user tools. Oh, Stephen had put that in there for me. Thank you. So that you can copy and paste. But it's just the that div. Okay, yes. And then we just go to the index.html5 in the root. So yeah, this is all you have to actually put in for material icons. So, or not in the root, but in source, you go to your index.html file, and I'm going to paste this into the chat too. Under here, you just need to add this script. So this script, send, is saying, oh, I wish I could have spaced those up more, sorry. Geez, I can't even do margins or padding in chat. Just kidding. So in the script tag, we're basically sending, saying that we want this identity widget in our page. Now we can run, let me leave this. Sorry, leave this up for you just in case. I usually get rid of this side thing. I remember when I first switched over to VS Code. No, it was Sublime. When I switched over to Sublime, and I was like, look at this cool navigation. I never use that. I never use it. Anyway. So now we can see that we have all of this changed. I usually git commit at like every single different, like I would have done it when we did Scully, and I would have done it when we changed the configuration file. But right now, oh, sorry, that's an alias for git add. I try not to use aliases in this, but anyways, then I'm gonna check it. Yep, git commit, and the message will be adds Scully Netlify config update and widget. It's a lot to put in there, but so now I'm going to push this. I think is this the first time I'm pushing? No, I didn't care. I'm going to push that. And because I pushed that, you'll notice when we did Netlify init, it didn't ask us like Firebase did if we wanted to set up continuous deployment and continuous deployment integration. It just does it automatically, and then you can turn it off. So it's almost it's opposite default. So, oh, bye, Jeffrey. Thank you for coming. Okay, so we can do Netlify open. Sorry, I had it in another window. And it goes here, and because you see this here, add Scully Netlify config update and widget. So that triggered that deploy, and again, you can change these under deploys. But so we know it's building, we have to actually turn on that we want identity turned on. So we just say enable identity. And then I want to actually add a few things. So you can, there's a lot that you can do here, but this is my favorite. So, because I don't log into anything with it. That's not let me do Google login. That's not true. I have one password because I don't remember anything. And you can do a default configuration, or you can set up your own with your client ID and your client secret. But so again, this was where we came with Netlify open. We click identity. We hit enable. Then you go to settings and usage. And then when you scroll down, you can find external providers. let's say GitHub as well. And then you can do a default configuration. And now that's enabled. There's a lot more that you can do. You can even set rules here. Once people sign up and sign in, you're able to set rules for them. Oh, we have to get some users first. So let's go ahead back to deploys to see if our build is done. You can see the Scully output now. Site is live. Oh, and you can also have deploy previews, just a heads up. So this way you can share it with your team, but nobody else, if somebody else wanders to that site, you've got to really worry. But deploy preview, but we actually made it live. So now, oh, shocker, my CSS messed up there. But it is here. Let me just give it some. Oh gosh. Maybe that'll make it easier to see. No. Oh, I have the wrong one. That's why. Whatever. So it's right here. You can see that it's there. I'm just very curious why. I guess I'll never know. But we click that now. And, oh, nice. Can you have your Netlify build deploy tab? Yes. Boop. Did you, Doug, did you want to see? Oh, so see how it says this? That's as long as you, nothing is set in yours. Just the repo. You can hit edit settings and it's always going to go to the Netlify TOML as a default, the one that we made, which I would like to change that it's reflected on here, but that isn't the case just yet. So this may say something different than what you have in your netlify.toml because they don't match up. But you can edit settings and set this, but just know it will always default to your netlify.toml. So is yours still deploying okay, Doug? Oh, and did you, so when you had deploy settings, your repository has both of those in there. You can do a base directory so that you can say, go to the Jamstack approach. Okay. Holler, let me know if that works. So Zoom, get out of here, Zoom. So now that you have those, the template information in that div and the script, you should now have the ability for your users to sign up or just sign up with Google. Please don't judge how many Google accounts are listed on this. And then you can log out and you can also log in. What was the command you ran to get published to run through Netlify? Yeah, so we have a, Stephen, if you do a git push, it will trigger a build and trigger a deploy, which will trigger a build. But you can also go to your deploys and say trigger deploy and do it manually. And you can also do it from your command line by saying Netlify deploy. How is Zoom controls just always in the way? So, so that's how you would do. So all of this is, we can disable JavaScript. And since we're pre-rendered, excuse me, I'm sorry. Did you actually disable? Oops. Oh, come on. Sorry. Okay, so disable script. All right. This, you can tell my brain's getting to the end of the workshop. Make sure to commit first. Yes. Yes. Skip push. Thank you, Sunny. So with there you go. With JavaScript disabled, which from working with PWAs and testing stuff through PWAs, always know that just disabling JavaScript and Chrome DevTools isn't 100% going to give you that. So it's always good to throttle, mess with that stuff, and completely disconnect your internet connection, which I can't do, or we would all be done with the workshop. But so we know that our pages are still working. One day we'll do some more free follow-up workshops to populate all of these, including blog, which isn't even a link yet, because you can do that really in a really cool way with Scully. I highly recommend checking out the way that they set up blogs, because you can do markdown blogs really easily. It's a super easy process to set up a blog. I highly recommend checking that out. But also, oh wait, am I hitting the right thing? Oh gosh, okay. Also, it's not going to give you any errors because you're hitting this, and we're calling JavaScript to make that widget come up, but you're not going to get any errors from that coming through. But everything that's pre-rendered will come through just fine. But when we do, another thing to think about is you can use caching and different types of, there we go, to make sure that your build process, if you're going to say rebuild every single time, your build process, you can set up caching and set up different ways of actually rendering it so that your build doesn't take so much time every time. Okay, so there's so much more to do that we can do with both of these strategies. But one of the biggest things I wanted to point out is that, like with framework wars, there is all this talk about how different these approaches are, and how one is so much better than the other for A, B, C, D reasons. Yet, a lot of the time, we're using a lot of the same technology. And so what really comes around this more, which I wish we would have had a little more time to talk about it, it's my fault, apologies, is basically your development process. So how we had great command line tools with both of these tools, being able to set these up with hosting by running command line tools and just going through that and having those dashboards to guide us through how we're getting these things up and running. Both of them are using JavaScript. We're both talking about serverless functions. We're pre-rendering with both. And these are, besides the main client side rendering option with Angular, these are both very viable options for your Angular applications. So, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. We only have 7 minutes, but I will look at the questions now, and please put any questions in chat. I just want to show you just a few more resources that I have in the slide. And again, I'll send you the slide links. Oops. Can any Angular application be rendered statically with Scully? Is there any prerequisites, like, for example, the type of link with a backend? So as far as actually rendering the static content, you can even use Scully with Angular JS applications. It's basically what your Scully pre-renders all of your routes that exist for you. And then it still, it works with state transfer and some other things to still use Angular for grabbing the data, getting everything that you need. But then it falls back to that pre-rendered content for loading it. And this is much more in depth than I'm saying. So please feel free to look at not only just like Scully.io, but also their repo to look at the issues, because they talk through a lot of this stuff there. But all that to say, open up your Angular application, add Scully, add Scully, run npm run Scully, see what happens. But there's a lot of fallback to transfer state and actually using Angular in your application still for some of the data. A huge thing that I should point out too is that Angular is the newest language to the Jamstack architecture. React and vanilla, obviously, with things like Hugo and Jekyll, have been using Jamstack architecture for a long time. So has React with Gatsby and Vue. We're finally getting things like the static site generator thanks to the Hero Devs team. And so we're learning a lot with the Angular approach to the Jamstack. But hand in hand with that, we're getting a lot of energy into the ecosystem. And in general, the Jamstack architecture is getting, is building up a lot more too. So all that to say that just, it's going this way. Instead of a plateau, we're going down, we're only heading up from here. So I just want to, yes, definitely work in progress. Exactly. That's Kyle. That's great. So yeah, the big takeaway is understanding that the difference, there's a lot of similarities. The difference is rendering on the server or rendering at build time, that pre-rendered, those pre-rendered assets. I just want to show you some of these. I don't know if you can hear a little voice there. And then I'll remember to share screen. It's a shame that I remembered how to share screens well at the end of the workshop. Okay, so some resources for the road. Again, highly recommend. Any questions about rendering, check out that rendering on the web blog post from Addie and Jason. They have this really great table at the bottom to kind of walk you through like really short, everybody's home. Good thing we're at the end of the workshop. Sorry, everyone. So there's a great resource there. The Netlify blog, if I may, I'll talk with the ng-conf team to send out a resource list that has all these, but also on the Netlify blog, I have specific blogs that go over everything that we talked about today. And then this is a really great resource for serverless tools from CSS Tricks. Chris basically put together, did I do a video of it to scroll through? All of these like major providers for Auth, for forms, for CMSs, for payments. You can do e-commerce and all this dynamic stuff with all these serverless functions that we can use. Check out the Universal repo because they always have a lot of really great conversations on there. And then we're just releasing soon the audio version of the Jamstack book. So keep your ears to the web. And while you have your ears on the web, check out Remotely Interesting. I'm going to release the I was going to try to release them at the exact same time, but it will be coming out this week where we talk about rendering in general. And it's a lot of really great points to help you wrap your mind around rendering. So find me at Twitter at tzmanics, tzmanics. My DMs are open. And you can also find me on the Netlify blog and Remotely Interesting. So thank you so much for coming out today.